Welcome into Real Pod Wednesdays. Dan Hope joined by Andy Anders as it is NFL Draft Week, which, as longtime listeners may know, is one of my personal favorite weeks of the year. I've been an NFL draft geek ever since I was a kid. Making my mock drafts is something I've been doing for a long, long time. And, I always love this week. And I think especially this year, it's going to be a really fun week for us, Andy, because we're going to get to see a lot of players who we've covered over the past, in some cases, 1 year, in some cases, 5 years. We're going to see these guys have their NFL dreams come true on either Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night. And there's going to be a lot of them, Andy, because the projections certainly make it seem like Ohio State is going to have 15 players drafted this week, which would tie the 7-round NFL draft record, break the school record for most draft picks in 1 year. Frankly, Andy, I would be surprised if any of those 15 players weren't drafted. And so I feel like Ohio State has a really good chance for a historic draft this week, which is certainly going to be very exciting for Ohio State and for Buckeye fans, and certainly speaks to just how talented that team was this past season.
Absolutely. And, even like I go back to Jack Sawyer, the one span of my reporting career where I was covering recruiting. It was about a 9-month period during COVID when Jack was coming in and they were kind of forming together that 2021 class. It was a lot. I mean, a lot of it was talking to those guys and guys I've known even since they were high schoolers, right? And developing that rapport and seeing them grow, seeing how their careers have unfolded, all the trials and turmoil that class went through, and now to see it pay off in their NFL dreams this Thursday through Saturday is going to be something really exciting to watch. And as a Bengals fan too, I'm going to be hoping my team addresses a few needs, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, so maybe they can scoop up one or two of these Buckeyes and get things going there.
I'm here in solidarity with you today. These could be Bengals colors. These could be Browns colors. I just decided to go
They're Ohio colors.
Ohio NFL team colors today. If you're a Bengals fan or a Browns fan, you can look at my colors here, and I've got your colors on for this week's episode of Real Pod Wednesdays. But I think the thing that's fun about this draft from an Ohio State perspective is, you could be a fan of any of the 32 NFL teams, and you can be rooting for your team to draft a few of these guys this weekend, because no matter what team you are, no matter what needs you have, there is somebody from Ohio State in this draft class who can make your team better. I mean, they literally have players at every single position group. They have a quarterback. They have 2 running backs. They have a wide receiver. They have a tight end. They have 4 offensive linemen. They have 4 defensive linemen. They have a linebacker. They have a corner, a safety, and a guy who could be either a corner or a safety. So they've got literally a little bit of everything in this draft. And certainly some guys are better prospects than others. But, I look at this draft and say, well, it probably most likely Josh Fryer and G. Scott Jr. are not going to be drafted. Certainly a possibility. Either of them could hear their names called in the late rounds. But I would not anticipate they will be drafted. I will anticipate that they will sign quickly after the draft as free agents. But, I think of those other 15 guys, I think you could legitimately rank those guys in so many different orders and it not be a right or wrong answer, which I think from a coverage perspective, I think that's what makes this draft so fascinating, because what Buckeyes don't have in this year's draft, they don't have that surefire first round lock, top 10 pick type guy like they had last year with Marvin Harrison Jr., like they had the year before of CJ Stroud. If Jeremiah Smith or Caleb Downs was draft eligible, they would have that. But fortunately for Ohio State, those guys are going to be playing for the Buckeyes for another year in Caleb Downs' case, another 2 years in Jeremiah Smith's case. But it's so interesting because we go into tomorrow night. There's a chance we could go through tomorrow night and no Buckeyes get drafted, and it just feels like a total disappointment of a night. Or there's a chance there could be 5 Buckeyes drafted, because you've got Josh Simmons, Emeka Egbuka, Donovan Jackson, Travion Henderson, Tyleik Williams, even JT Tuimoloau, Quinshon Judkins. It wouldn't be shocking to see any of those guys hear their names called tomorrow night on day 1 of a draft. Certainly, it would probably be a little bit of a surprise if Quinshon Judkins was a first-round pick, but it's not out of a question. He has been projected in a first-rounder in the occasional mock draft. And then, whoever doesn't get picked tomorrow night, you just anticipate day 2 is going to be a very busy day for the Buckeyes. And then you anticipate day 3 is also going to be a very busy day for the Buckeyes. And it's going to be, if you're an Ohio State fan who watches the draft and watches all 3 days of the draft, there's going to be an intriguing storyline for you to follow in every single part of this draft. So I think that's what's going to be really fun. Last year they only had 4 players drafted. It was kind of like a sit around and wait for the next guy to get picked. This year, there's going to be some point where like 2 or 3 Buckeyes go in like a very short span because there's just so many players. The odds are good that that's going to happen. We've done a couple fun things on the site this week to prepare for the NFL draft. One of them that we put out there on Tuesday was a build your Buckeye draft squad exercise where if you haven't seen it yet, go check out 11warriors.com or go check out our social accounts and let us know who your squad would be. But if you've been on social media, you've probably seen the template out there before of the kind of you have $15, draft your team. And so we did that for Ohio State because there's 15 guys who are projected to be drafted. The way we did this was based on their average mock draft projection based on our last NFL mock draft roundup of recent mocks. And so not necessarily our ranking of which Buckeyes we think are the best prospects, but just based on that average composite, we put each guy into a tier based on, basically trying to simulate the idea of, if you had 5 picks in the draft to draft Buckeyes, well, it'd be easy to just say pick the 5 who are projected to be drafted highest, but realistically, you wouldn't be likely to be able to draft all those guys. So the way we did it is you could pick any 5 guys. You could pick 2 guys from a $5 tier if you want, but then you've got to go pick guys from the lower tiers to fill out your team, or you could just go straight down the list 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. But the way we did it was the $5 tier, the 3 guys who have been most frequently projected to be first round picks: Josh Simmons, Emeka Egbuka, Donovan Jackson. $4 tier: Travion Henderson, Tyleik Williams, JT Tuimoloau. The $3 tier: Quinshon Judkins, Jack Sawyer, Lathan Ransom. The $2 tier: Will Howard, Denzel Burke, Ty Hamilton. The $1 tier: Seth McLaughlin, Jordan Hancock, Cody Simon. To be clear, all these guys are going to be making a lot more than $5 in the NFL, but this was just a simple way to break it down, kind of a fun thought exercise here. So, Andy, as you went through that list and built your squad, who were the 5 guys you picked and why?
Yeah, for me, I really tried to put on my NFL GM hat and say, if I were really building a franchise around 5 guys, in these tiers, and we both took the same approach in terms of one $5 guy, 1 4, 1 3, 1 2, 1 1. Felt that was the most efficient use of the $15 there. But for me, in the $5 tier, I went with Donovan Jackson because there's so much he can do for me on the offensive line. Offensive guard is obviously going to be maybe where a lot of scouts are seeing him, but he proved he was one of the nation's best offensive tackles coming down the stretch of the season last year. Those 4 games at the end of the year, especially. I was looking, writing his. I was looking up his stats today, and two pressures the entire college football playoff. Didn't allow a sack after his very first start at offensive tackle there. Abdul Carter got 2 sacks against him in that Penn State game, and he never gave up a sack again. Just a ridiculous performance down the stretch of last season for Donovan Jackson. Showed he could play tackle at the next level if I needed him to. Either way, it gives me a versatile option and a guy I can form my offensive line around if I'm that NFL GM. And I think next up, and this is a theme that's going to play out in all 5 of my picks, I think NFL GMs, you talk to them, you talk to how teams are built these days, the top 3 priorities, and maybe this has shifted a little bit with the surge in receivers recently, but the top 3 priorities have been quarterback, protect your quarterback, get after the other team's quarterback, right? So for me, to address priority number 3, I think JT Tuimoloau fits that mold. I think between he and Sawyer, he has the most, pass rush upside at the next level. to get after quarterbacks, the physical tools, the freakish athleticism, those things kind of fit that JT Tuimoloau mold. Also, an excellent run defender, of course. So, someone I have no problems anchoring my defensive line there. Quinshon Judkins gives me a good, powerful downhill option at running back, and I can form my run game around some of the things he does. Maybe get some big, beefy offensive linemen to surround him with and really get a good, strong downhill run game going. And then Will Howard, I said it, quarterback's the top priority. And frankly, my ceiling, I kind of am in the range, and maybe it's because I've covered him. Maybe it's because of some bias. I think, and we'll talk about this later too, I think Will Howard is at the very top end of what people are projecting for him at the next level. I think he's got the ability to be a B-tier starter, be a really solid guy that can win with the right pieces around him for teams at the next level. Love his accuracy. Love so many things Will Howard does. And so no problems with, for only $2, right? In the grand scheme of this, I feel like he's a steal. And then Jordan Hancock, versatility is so vital in NFL secondaries these days. And that nickel position in particular is so vital to modern NFL defense against the kind of passing attacks that you see at the highest level of football. And Jordan can slide into any number of roles. His ability to play safety opened up Ohio State's defense to play some of its best football this past year. And so getting a piece like that to build in my secondary, and again, similar to Donovan Jackson, to where I can plug him in at a few different spots and take the best available at some other ones, right? So for me, I'm happy with my $15 spin there. Dan, we had some overlap in ours, but some differences too. So I'm very curious to get your thoughts on why you made your picks.
Yeah, we did have some overlap, and I'll be honest, I was kind of surprised you didn't take Jack Sawyer, but I'm glad you didn't, because if you did, there's a chance we would have had the same exact squad, and that wouldn't have been very fun for the purposes of this discussion. And so you mentioned the overlap. We did have overlap at the top. We did both take Donovan Jackson, and that was a tough choice for me between Donovan Jackson and Josh Simmons, because I think if you think about like the prototype for an NFL offensive tackle, I think Josh Simmons fits that prototype better, and I think that's why he is, projected by many to be Ohio State's top draft pick. But I just think the versatility that Donovan has, when I look at Donovan and I say, he played so well in the CFP that I think he could be a tackle in the NFL if he needs to be. But at worst, I think he's going to be a really good guard. I think the floor for Donovan Jackson is higher than it is for Josh Simmons. And that's not to say I think Josh Simmons is going to be a bust. I think Josh Simmons could be a really good left tackle. But I think the floor for me for Donovan Jackson is I think he's a really solid guard in the NFL for a long time. I think the ceiling is he could be an all-pro guard, or he could even be a really good tackle. And so I think just that proven versatility, that experience he has, is why I went with Donovan Jackson with my first choice there. I took TreVeyon Henderson from a $4 tier. Again, we'll talk about this soon when we kind of make some of our round predictions. But, I mean, I think there's a possibility TreVeyon Henderson is going to be the first Buckeye drafted tomorrow night, even though that's not the average projection right now. There's been kind of some late smoke around the idea of him being a first round pick, maybe being that second running back off the board. And, I think it's just that home run hitting ability that makes him a unique player. I think you think about what a guy like a Jahmyr Gibbs has been for Lions. And I think he could be that same kind of player in the NFL with his, explosive ability to make big plays. We saw his massive improvement as a blocker this past season. He's very capable of catching the ball out of a backfield. So I just think that star potential that TreVeyon has at running back, I want to bet on that. It's certainly possible that Quinshon Judkins ends up being the better NFL running back of these two. I think Quinshon Judkins has a really good all-around skill set, and I think he's going to be a good NFL running back. But I think that upside of TreVeyon, I'm betting on that if I'm taking one of the two in this year's draft. And so that's why I went with TreVeyon for my team. As mentioned, I did go with Jack Sawyer, number 3. I mean, I would have been hard-pressed not to take Jack Sawyer no matter what tier he was in, because I've said it before, I'm a big fan of Jack Sawyer's game. I mean, we saw the guy in the biggest moments of the season really step up for Ohio State. And I just think the guy's a gamer. Maybe he doesn't have the longest arms. We don't know his 40 time because he didn't run in a pre-draft process. But, maybe he wouldn't have had the fastest 40 time. But the guy's excellent at using his hands. He plays with great technique. He's got great strength. He's got an incredible motor. I just think that he's one of those guys. Is he ever going to be an all-pro pass rusher in the NFL? Probably not. But I think, much like maybe a Sam Hubbard kind of player, I think he's going to be one of those guys who just goes to the NFL and is just really productive for for many years, however long he plays in the NFL. It's just that guy you can rely on to be a really good, maybe your second defensive end. I think Jack's going to be that guy. So for me, he was a no-brainer choice. And the same with Will Howard. I think Will Howard, like you said, I don't think that he's getting enough credit personally in this NFL draft process, at least from the analysts. We'll see where he ultimately falls in the draft over the next couple of nights. But, I look at this draft and I don't think there's one quarterback who I view as a sure thing in this draft. Cam Ward's likely going to be the number 1 overall pick tomorrow night, and I don't disagree with that. But, I don't think Cam Ward would have been the number 1 pick last year. I don't think he would have even gone ahead of, Jaden Daniels or Drake May last year. So I think this is a quarterback draft where there's no sure things. And I look at it and say, I think there's a world in which Will Howard ends up being the best quarterback out of this draft. I'm not necessarily saying I think he is going to be that, but I think there's a scenario in which he does become the best quarterback from this draft, because I don't think there's a sure thing. And I just think Will Howard has a lot of qualities that I think can make him successful in the NFL. Obviously, we saw what he did in the college football playoff. To play at that level against that level of competition on that stage, I think that tells you about this is a guy who's going to be ready for the spotlight that the NFL is going to throw at him. And I just think the mental makeup of Will, I think he's one of those guys. We saw it at Ohio State. I think in my time covering Ohio State, I don't think I've seen another Ohio State quarterback who is more comfortable handling the spotlight that comes with being an Ohio State quarterback. And you're going to face the same kind of thing in the NFL. So I just think he's the kind of guy that, I think at worst, he's going to be a really good backup in the NFL, because I think he's one of those guys that no matter what his role is, he's going to go into an organization, he is going to work his butt off, and he is going to be a consummate team player, a guy that people want to be around. But I also think no matter where he gets drafted and what the depth chart looks like, he's also going to be a guy who's going to go into whatever team he goes to and believe he's eventually going to be the starter for that team. And he's going to work hard every day to prove that he should be the starter for that team. And so I'm buying stock in Will Howard, especially if it gets to the point of him being a 3rd round pick or lower. I would, really, really bet on him to, have a chance to really outperform his ultimate draft position. And then, that last row of guys, that was probably the hardest pick for me, of having only that $1 left between Jordan Hancock, Seth McLaughlin, and Cody Simon, because those are all guys I think, in that early day free range that I think could end up being really good players. Obviously, Seth McLaughlin won the Remington Trophy last year. I think Cody Simon really legitimized himself as an NFL linebacker prospect with his play this past season. But I went with the same pick as you, and I went with Jordan Hancock just because of, again, that versatility that he brings, his ability to play really anywhere in the secondary, and another guy who I think is not getting as much credit as he deserves right now in the draft process. You look at his numbers from Ohio State's Pro Day, he's one of the most athletic defensive backs in this entire draft. And I think that's maybe gotten a little bit overlooked because he didn't do the athletic testing at the combine. But, I think sometimes people see that slot corner and they think, oh, he's just a slot corner. Like it's, same thing as kind of like a receiver. Oh, he's just a slot receiver. But one, that's a really important position, like being able to guard slot receivers. There's a lot of really good slot receivers in the NFL right now. So being able to guard that position, for one, is really important. Secondly, this is a guy who's proven he can do more than that. He can play safety. He's played outside corner before. So I just think he's one of those guys in the middle round. You can bring him in. He probably starts out as a really valuable backup for you and a guy who can play a lot on special teams as well and has the ability to grow into a really capable starter in an NFL secondary. So that's why me, like you, also finished off my picks with Jordan Hancock.
Yeah, I just laughed when you said, only a slot corner, because it's so true of what people say sometimes about those guys that play nickel, that play that. And I think it's a lack of understanding of what all goes into playing that spot, first off, and how important it is nowadays at the NFL level. And I've talked about it, I talked about it earlier, saying that, it's an integral part of the modern defense, is because so often there's three receivers on the field now, or even if there's only two, they're dynamic enough to where you need maybe a nickel option or a big nickel option to go out there and give you some dynamic abilities, even against some 12 personnel or some unique things that NFL offenses do in the modern game, and the way they can attack the ball through the air, the middle spaces. You have more directions that you have to go and defend from that nickel spot than the traditional outside corner spot. And I think maybe 6-7 years ago, there was a time when it was sort of your number 3 corner would play nickel if you were a given college football team, right? I don't think that's the case at all in 2025. Like, if you were to sit here and say, who's Ohio State's best corner from last year's team, I might say Jordan Hancock. Like, I would maybe put him above. I probably would put him above even Denzel Burke and Davison Igbinosun for what he did. You look at the numbers, you look at the production, what he did throughout his career, willing to stick his face in the fan and be a run defender too, and give that run support that you oftentimes need from that nickel spot. He was always in phase and coverage. He's a fantastic cover guy who can run with receivers in multiple directions. And so for me, as I sit here and think about who's the most underrated player, period, for Ohio State in this draft, I think it's Jordan Hancock. I think, you did the NFL mock draft roundup 4.0 here this week. In that, only one of those mock drafts had Jordan Hancock as a 3rd round pick, as a day 2 pick. The rest were day 3. And I think getting him on day 3 is going to be a steal for an NFL team, just for how good he is at playing that nickel role and how important it is these days to NFL defenses, but also the versatility. If you need him to slide back and play safety, if you need him to bump out and play corner, he can do those things. And so, to me, Jordan Hancock is the most underrated player in Ohio State's entire NFL draft class. And that's not even mentioning those physical tools you just mentioned and how well he tested, and seeing that, the broad jump when we were at Ohio State's pro day and how much he exceeded the rest of the other elite athletes in that discipline. So, Dan, I'm kind of curious to hear for you, who is the most underrated player in this Ohio State draft class?
Yeah, and just to your point there again on Jordan, if you think about even Ohio State coming up this year ahead, and we've talked about like the possibility Jermaine Matthews Jr. could play nickel for Ohio State this year. Maybe not most likely to be his primary position, but like Jermaine Matthews Jr. is going to be a top 2 cornerback for Ohio State this year. If he plays nickel, it's not because he's become a number 3 corner. It's because they think he can be an asset to them at that very important position, and that's how you align the defense best. So I think that's a very apt point on Jordan Hancock, that just because he was playing nickel doesn't mean he was Ohio State's number 3 corner. It just means that he was a really good player that was really good at playing that nickel spot. Going back to your question about the most underrated Buckeye, I mean it's hard because there's so many different ways that I could go with this, and I think Jordan Hancock a good choice there. But I think I'm going to go back to Cody Simon, because I've seen him in a lot of mocks where he's been down, 6th, 7th round. I mean, in my opinion, I think Cody Simon's a better prospect than Tommy Eichenberg was a year ago. And Tommy Eichenberg was a 5th round pick. And that's no shade at Tommy Eichenberg. I think Cody's more athletic than Tommy was. And I think the way that Cody played this past season showed the ability that he has to be a very capable NFL linebacker. Is he necessarily like a 3-down guy who's going to be out there in coverage situations in the NFL? I don't know, but I think at worst, I think he's a guy who can be an asset on 1st and 2nd down as an inside linebacker. I also think he's a guy who's going to be a really, really good special teams player in the NFL, just as he was at Ohio State. And so to me, he's a guy that should be firmly in that 4th to 5th round range. And a lot of the mocks I've seen have had him in that 6th to 7th round range. So, again, a lot of guys I could go with there because, again, I think Jack Sawyer is being underrated with, most of the mocks having him in the 3rd or 4th round now. I think Will Howard is underrated. I think Jordan Hancock, to your point, is underrated. You could make that argument for Seth McLaughlin, but I'll go with Cody Simon just because I feel like out of all the guys in this draft, he's probably one of the ones that's being talked about the least for Ohio State. Yet I feel like he has a chance to be a really good NFL player.
If you only had one player that you could select as from Ohio State's draft class this year, who would it be?
Man, again, it's so tough because, again, there's like 8 different guys that I could go with and not feel bad about my pick. I've told you how bullish I am on Jack Sawyer, and so I'm tempted to say Jack Sawyer, but I might again go with Donovan Jackson just because I just feel like out of all the guys in this draft, he might be the closest to a sure thing in terms of a guy who I just feel like is going to be, at worst, a really, really good NFL player.
Yeah, honestly, that was going to be my answer, but I can't double up here. So I'll go Josh Simmons then, because I do think he has maybe the most upside out of the draft class. That's a hard statement to make because there's a lot of guys with a lot of upside for this Ohio State draft class. But even when he was coming in, I go back to when he was coming in from San Diego State, and we heard about how much of a steal Ohio State felt it got after a number of misses at offensive tackle in the transfer portal back in 2023, and how much of an athletic freak he was. And then you saw it bear out the second half of his first season at Ohio State, the strides he took, and the freakish athleticism was always there, but it was about developing that technique. In the first half of 2024, he was one of the best offensive tackles in the country and was a midseason All-American for that reason. The season-ending injury is unfortunate. Injuries happen a lot on the offensive line. And if he stays healthy, though, it's just the athletic profile of Josh Simmons is everything you want at offensive tackle. The ability to block at the second level when he needs to, the feet and the size and the length to handle edge rushers, the power. He's got a really complete athletic profile, and he showed with proper development what he can do in the first half of that Ohio State season. Experience and proven reps, a lot of proven reps is very important for drafting offensive linemen to the next level. And I understand he has a shortage of that in some ways because of the injury and because of some of the struggles earlier in his career. But to me, I think Josh Simmons has the most upside in this draft. So if I were an NFL GM and I can only take one of these Ohio State players, I think I would go Josh Simmons.
So we're running a contest on 11 Warriors this week. If you haven't seen it yet, go on over to 11warriors.com and check it out, in which we are asking you, the listener, the reader, to predict which round each of Ohio State's draft prospects get picked in. And whoever gets the most correct will win a $100 gift card from 11 Warriors Dry Goods. So if you want to get some of our nice new t-shirts, we have 6 t-shirts that have been released in just the last few months commemorating Ohio State's national championship run. If you want to get your hands on a few of those, you win one of these gift cards. You'll have a chance to buy yourself a few new t-shirts or whatever else you want, sweatshirts, hats, all kinds of different stuff that is available in our dry goods store over on 11warriors.com. Lots of good stuff there. And if you win this contest, you will have the opportunity to win an a $100 gift card from 11 Warriors Dry Goods. And so if you have participated or are going to go participate in that contest, we'll wish you the best of luck. We'll go ahead and make our picks. We're not eligible to win the gift card, but we will go ahead and make our predictions for what we would pick if we were in the contest for which round each Buckeye will go in. And man, Andy, this is tough. I was going through it before we started recording, and this is tough because every single player, there's not one player in this draft where it's I'm certain he's going to go in this round. There's a range for every single Buckeye in this year's draft. There's not that one guy who's a first round lock. all those guys in the first round conversation could also go in the second round. And then you've got guys, they go in the second or third round. They go in third or fourth round. You look at that mock draft roundup, there were some guys who were projected to go as high as the third round or as low as the seventh round. And so it's definitely a challenge trying to pick where each guy will go this year, but we'll take our best shot at it. Andy, I'll start with you. First round, how many Buckeyes do you think will go in the first round? Which Buckeyes and why?
Yeah, I'm going with two. That's what I have. I have Josh Simmons and I have Emeka Egbuka. And remember, this isn't me saying where I think people should go. It's where I think they will go. Where will NFL GMs take them? How do I dictate these results? And I do think, similar to how I said Josh Simmons, I feel like could have the most upside of these Ohio State prospects. I think a lot of times you see NFL GMs draft based on that upside, based on what a player can be. There's not an exact science to this either. Sometimes they don't want the high upside guy that's had injury history. There's always a mix. And it might vary based on position. But to me, I think the upside for Josh Simmons is going to be attractive enough to where a team's going to want to take him especially if you get into the late first, mid-late first, and you're looking for an offensive tackle. It's such a premium position that I think there's a really good chance that he gets off the board in the first round. And then the other guy I have coming off the board in the first is Emeka Egbuka. And I mean, the production speaks for itself when you talk about Ohio State's career receptions leader, always solid. He's going to be a really good receiver and is perfectly capable, even though he was never Ohio State's number one receiver, is perfectly capable of being an NFL number one receiver. I'm really high on what Emeka Egbuka can bring, and I think his floor is perhaps the highest of any Ohio State prospect. There's a couple guys in that conversation of a very high floor, you're really confident that they're going to be a solid player, barring some really bad injury luck or something. And to me, the way Emeka always has approached his work, how NFL GMs love him as a person off the field, what he does, I'm really confident that he'll have at least a good NFL career. And so to me, I think NFL GMs see that. And I would say those are my two first round picks.
I'm going to go 4 first round picks, and maybe I've got more exposure bias on these guys when I do anyone else in the draft. And I will say, I do plan on having a mock draft on 11warriors.com by the end of the day on Wednesday. I do reserve the right in the hours from which this has been published to actually finalizing my mock draft, the possibility that I could change my picks as more information comes out, as I study a little bit deeper into who each team might pick. But as of right now, I'm going to go with 4 Buckeyes in the first round. And I'm just going to start with TreVeyon Henderson. I mentioned it. There's just been a lot of smoke, it feels like, the last few days, but TreVeyon Henderson is going to be a first round pick. And so I'm buying that. You never know what to believe in the week leading up to the draft. There's always a lot of smoke screens out there, but I'm going to say this is real smoke, but TreVeyon Henderson is going to be a first round pick. I'm going to go with Donovan Jackson as a first-round pick. I think his versatility, his ability to play multiple positions as one of the best, most well-rounded offensive linemen in this draft, I think that gets Donovan Jackson in round 1. I do have Josh Simmons in round 1, as mentioned. I think his upside as a left tackle. It does feel like maybe his draft stock has kind of trended down a little bit going up to the draft. I think it was interesting that he decided not to attend the draft when he was going to be attending the draft a week ago. But I still think, at worst, I think he's going to be a late first round pick, because I think you could make the case for Josh Simmons potentially having the most upside of any offensive tackle in this draft. I think if you're looking for that prototype left tackle, he might be the best guy, because, Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks are both guys that, there's some concern. Maybe they have to move into guard because they don't have enough length. Armin Membu is a guy who played right tackle at Missouri. So if you're looking for a guy who's played left tackle and who has that left tackle body type, I'm not sure there's a better guy in this draft than Josh Simmons. And so if Josh Simmons went in the top half of round 1, I wouldn't be shocked. It seems more likely like he's going to go in the second half of round 1, but I do think he'll be a first round pick. And then my last one, I'm going to go Tyleik Williams. I think Tyleik Williams, you look at the teams that he visited with before the draft, there were 7 reported visits. 6 of those teams are picking in those final 10 picks of round 1. And so there's a lot of potential landing spots there, whether it's the Vikings, whether it's the Lions, whether it's the Bills, whether it's the Eagles, the Chiefs. There's a lot of teams there in that late first round range who could be logical landing spots for Tyleik Williams. So because of that, I also have Tyleik Williams in round 1.
That's a sage evaluation there based on the visits. So a little bit of intel, a little bit of gamesmanship, I see. But yeah, I've got 5 second rounders. That's where I think it's really going to be a big pop off for the Buckeyes in this draft. And some guys that I think will go very early second, and that starts with Donovan Jackson. Obviously, I just talked him up. He was my guy that I said I would take, the $5 tier from that exercise earlier. And the versatility, again, we've talked a lot about it on this show. I think that Donovan is going to have a great NFL career wherever he ends up, but I do see him slipping into the second round. Just a hunch, I guess. There's no real good concrete reason. I think he's going to be late first, early second. That feels to me very much like the range Donovan Jackson is going to go in this draft. And I think Travion Henderson is another early second round pick. But to me, the way the running back position in general has been devalued over the course of the last several years at the NFL level. To me, I have trouble projecting running backs as first rounders just in general, unless they're considered those kinds of generational talents, like you saw from Saquon Barkley several years ago, like we've seen, over the years where you have that guy who's obviously generational talent at running back. Travion Henderson could be an awesome running back in the NFL. And I liked the Jahmyr Gibbs comparison you made earlier. But to me, I think the way the position's been devalued, how NFL GMs feel they can get really good running backs, and there have been really good running backs taken in the late rounds of drafts, a lot of them pretty recently in the NFL. To me, I have trouble projecting running backs round 1. So for me, Travion Henderson's going to be an early round 2 pick. And I think for me, I have Quinshon Judkins as a mid to late round 2 pick. I think it's fitting they both go in the same round. It just feels like it almost has to be that way, The third guy that I think is an early round 2 pick is Tyleik Williams. A lot of the same reasons you mentioned. There's a lot of interest from, like you said, from late first round teams, it seems, on the Tyleik Williams front. But I have him slipping just barely into round 2 as kind of on that borderline. The athletic profile, the production is very good. And round 2 is still an amazing accomplishment for a lot of guys. So it's definitely there's a lot of things to like if someone's coming off the board at round 2. That's just kind of how I see the dominoes falling there. And the sense I get. And then I said 5 round 2 guys, and now I'm losing track of. Oh, JT, duh. JT Tuimoloau is my 5th round 2. I mentioned the edge rushing upside. I think there are gaps in both he and Jack's production that, for me, prevent them from getting to first round status, where obviously they both had an amazing college football playoff run. They both had stretches of their careers outside of that CFP run where they looked like one of the best defensive ends in college football. But then there were also some lulls they went through in 2024 and 2023 where we weren't seeing kind of that consistent sack production, TFL production. That's not all, it's not all about production at the next level, but I do think it's something that's going to drop them both from that sort of day one pack of consideration. And so I have JT Tuimoloau as the 5th guy I see going in round 2 for Ohio State.
I've got 4 again in round 2. Starts with Emeka Egbuka. Very tough for me to decide between round 1 and round 2 for him. Ultimately, it came down to looking at team fits and just looking at it and saying, that late round 1 range, I don't see a ton of teams where, to me, he makes the most sense as a fit there. He's been connected to a few teams. Certainly Houston Texans are a possibility. Washington Commanders have been brought up. Philadelphia Eagles have been brought up. But I look at all those teams and go, well, those aren't teams that necessarily like a slot receivers necessarily like their top need. Whereas I look in the second round and say like there's a lot of teams there early second round that need wide receiver help. And so my slight hunch is Emeka falls just outside of round 1, but he goes very early in round 2. I've got JT Tuimoloau in round 2, and that's another guy that again I debated a little bit the possibility of putting him in round 1. I know, Todd McShay put something out on, I believe, Monday saying that, JT is going to be a top 40 pick and he wouldn't be surprised if he goes in round 1. I'm going to, again, say I don't think he quite gets into round 1, but I think it'll be close. I think JT goes in that top half of round 2. I have Quinshon Judkins in round 2 as well. I think to the point about running backs being devalued, I do feel like there's been a little bit of movement back in the other direction there to where, you're never going to see another draft. Like I think it was Ronnie Brown, Cedric Benson, and Cadillac Williams all went in the top 5. Like you're never going to see that happen again with running backs. But I do think there's been, you look at it, who was the best player on the best team last year? Saquon Barkley. Like I think you teams are seeing the impact a guy like that can make, and running backs are starting to be pushed up the board a little bit more. And so I think Quinshon's a guy where if we were having this conversation a few years ago, I probably would say round 3, but I'm going to say round 2 because I think there's enough momentum moving back toward running backs that I think he gets into round 2. And I'm also going to go with Jack Sawyer. And maybe I'm shooting a little high because it does. Most of the projections have him in the 3rd round. But yeah, I said I'm a big believer in Jack Sawyer, and my feeling is some team out there is going to be too. There's going to be some team out there that's a big believer in Jack Sawyer that really wants Jack Sawyer on their football team, and they're going to take him in the 2nd round.
Moving on to round 3, I have 2 guys here, and this is where I see Jack Sawyer going. I think, like you said, the bulk of the mocks seem to have him going in round 3, and just kind of, again, going off the sort of just the vibes and the talk surrounding Jack leading into this draft. Not just the mocks, but just kind of general, like, doubts about whether it's his arm length or maybe he didn't have the best showing in through the combine process and all of that stuff. I think Jack falls a little bit, not in my eyes, but in the eyes of some NFL GMs. It does only take one team to fall in love, though, and I could very well see Jack being a 2nd round pick, to your point. If I were picking, I would have him probably in the 1st round, if we're being honest, but in the 2nd round for sure. He's an elite run defender, man. Elite run defender. And it is so underappreciated out of defensive ends by, I think, the common fan, by even executives, how valuable great run defending defensive ends are. I loved the Sam Hubbard comparison from you early. I think he is that kind of guy that can be just a bookend, set the edge. No one's getting outside of me. I'm going to follow, or if I got to crash in, that's what I got to do. I'm going to follow my technique, my sound, defensive end play, and stop the run, and then get after the quarterback. And I think maybe there's some more upside that's untapped for Jack moving forward as a pass rusher that I'm eager to see if he can get to. Coming out of, I certainly thought he was going to be a little bit more of that coming out of high school. And again, he and JT both had these amazing playoff runs. I don't want to downplay how great their Ohio State careers were, but I do think there's some untapped upside potentially to Jack getting after the quarterback that maybe he can tap into at the NFL level. But I'm very confident he's going to be an elite run defender. So I think he'll be a steal for a team in round 3, but I think he goes in round 3. And then my other is Will Howard. I think Will is that maybe a little on the higher end, a little bullish of the projections. There were definitely some mocks that have him in round 3, but maybe slanting a little more later. To me, it's that only one team needs to fall in love, and that. Again, I think there's going to be some NFL executive scouts that sit there and say the same things we have. You look at a guy who set Ohio State's completion percentage record with all the great quarterbacks they've had recently. He's excellent in areas where I don't think you see a lot of excellence from college quarterbacks in the intermediate passing game. 15 yards, working the middle of the field. These are things that a lot of college quarterbacks don't really have in their arsenal, but are very important at the NFL level. And I think that's maybe a differentiator that Will has, while he doesn't have the arm strength, the pure arm strength of, some of the great prospects that have come out of the college ranks the last several years at the quarterback position. It's really the only hole that you can kind of poke in his game as a prospect to me, because he's great at diagnosing defenses, his recall, his appreciation, understanding of the game. We know he's a film junkie, has athleticism, has height. Like there's a lot to like about Will Howard as a prospect, and that's why I see him being a really solid NFL starter, a good player, a good starting quarterback in the league if he reaches that ceiling. And I think a team is going to see that and take him in the third round, and maybe be very, very happy that they got Will Howard in the third round of the 2025 NFL draft.
I also have Will Howard in round 3. I really do believe that he's going to be a top 100 pick in this draft. I even considered round 2, but I think, the way the draft seems to be trending, it seems like Shedeur Sanders is probably going to fall further than people expected initially. And I think that could just kind of have a ripple effect where, it kind of keeps, that second tier of quarterbacks, which, interestingly, it's Will Howard, it's Kyle McCord, it's Quinn Ewers, which is going to be another fun storyline to follow during the draft, is where does Will Howard go in comparison to 2 other former Ohio State quarterbacks. But I think round 3 is the sweet spot for Will Howard, most likely. I think, if you want, I know the tiebreaker in our contest is the exact pick number he goes at. So I'll make a specific prediction for this one. I'm going to say he's going to be pick 90 to the Los Angeles Rams. That just feels like a good fit for me. Go in, back up Matt Stafford for a couple years, then maybe succeed him as their starting quarterback if he develops the right way. That just feels like a good fit for me. So I'm going to go with that round 3. But, to all the things you said, Andy, I mean, the guy's a national champion. The guy's proved he could win on the biggest stage of college football. I think he's got all the right intangibles. It only takes one team to fall in love with him, and I think one team out there is going to do that, and they're going to take him in the third round.
Moving on to the fourth round, I considered a lot of these guys as possible day 2 picks, even a guy I'm going to mention in the 5th round here. But to me, I overprojected a lot of Ohio State players last year, and I think that's kind of gone into some of maybe why I'm a little lower on some guys here as far as where they go, because, you get that exposure bias. You want guys to go high, perhaps that you've covered for your time, and you see what they can do at their best. And then, draft weekend comes and the NFL GMs aren't as sold as you, and they fall further than you expected. So for me, 4 guys, and I think maybe all 4 of them are people I wouldn't be surprised to see go day 2, but that I see going there in the first round at day 3. Denzel Burke is one that I think, unfortunately, if we were having this conversation a year ago, his stock would be higher. Just some inconsistencies that happened during the 2024 season, but still a guy that's a very physical athlete, very willing to engage in contact at the corner position, get up in a receiver's face, make contact, play the press. There's a lot to like in his skill set in that regard for an NFL team. And I'll be curious to see where Denzel actually lands coming off of this year. And there's definitely been some mocks that have him round 3. So, again, a guy that could sneak into the second day. I think Ty Hamilton comes off the board in the 4th round because I do think there's a general appreciation from NFL GMs and people about, at the defensive tackle position, about run defense and being a stout guy on the interior. And I think people have realized the last several months that there's a little more to Ty Hamilton's athletic profile than maybe was given previous credence. Very strong, sneaky athletic for his position there. I think that he's someone who could bulk up a little bit and play nose guard or be a 3-tech and be a really stout run-stopping 3-tech for NFL teams. So there's maybe even a little versatility in his game to me with Ty. So he's another guy I see in the 4th round. I think Seth McLaughlin's going to be a 4th round steal for somebody. He may fall further than that just because centers don't get drafted that high. He is coming off the Achilles injury. But this is a guy who won the Remington Trophy. I mean, I think where he's been mocked is kind of low to me. Like, if I were an NFL GM, I'd absolutely be selecting him in round 2. I think if I think he's worth that. But he is a fantastic center. We saw it. A pro's pro who knows how to approach the game. Ended up being excellent as both a run and pass blocker this year. Had some, he had his issues his last season at Alabama, but a lot of that was cured in his year playing at Ohio State, or at least his 10 games before the season-ending injury. So I think he's going to be another guy that comes off later than I would take and is going to be a steal for a team there in the fourth round. But I do see the upside of his projection just because of what he did for Ohio State this past season. And then the other guy is Lathan Ransom. I see coming off the board in the fourth round. It seemed a pretty hefty split between round 3, round 4 for Lathan. He's an amazing, if you're looking for a run support strong safety, that classic hard-hitting guy, I think Lathan's your man late day 2, early day 3 in this draft. But how much of an emphasis is there on that in the modern NFL game? Lathan, I think his pass coverage skills are underrated in some ways. He's an excellent zone pass coverage defender, showed soundness, great fundamentals in those areas throughout his Ohio State career. But I think there are other players valued higher for those attributes as pass defenders. And so I see Lathan slipping into the fourth round for that reason.
I also have 4 guys in round 4, 2 the same as you, 2 different, but 2 that I have the same are Denzel Burke and Lathan Ransom. Like you said with Denzel Burke, I mean, it just, I think if we had this conversation a year ago, we probably would have been talking about him as a second, third round pick. His stock going into the draft, it almost kind of feels like Shaun Wade a few years ago, to where Shaun Wade was that guy. He came into the year projected first round pick, didn't quite live up to that billing. He ended up slipping into the 5th round of a draft. I think Denzel goes 1 round earlier than that. 4th round feels like the sweet spot for him for me. Same thing with Lathan Ransom. Like you said, he's kind of seems to be right on that fringe, but I think 4th round is probably more likely for Lathan Ransom. I've also got the other DB in there. I was a little surprised you didn't have Jordan Hancock in your round 4 of how much you were talking him up earlier. But I also have Jordan Hancock in round 4 because like we talked about before, his versatility, how well he tested at Ohio State's Pro Day. I think he should be a 4th round pick. And so I've got Jordan Hancock in round 4. And then I've also got Cody Simon in round 4 because I said it before. I think he's a better prospect than Tommy Eichenberg was a year ago. Tommy Eichenberg went in the 5th round. So using that logic simply, I have Cody Simon in the 4th round. You mentioned Ty Hamilton and Seth McLaughlin. I've got both of them in round 5. So yes, I have all 15 of Ohio State's projected draft picks going in the first 5 rounds. And honestly, I wanted to pick somebody to go in round 6 or round 7 because it's I feel like I'm being so optimistic that I'm setting myself up to look very optimistic in hindsight. But I just think all 15 of these guys, I really don't think any of these 15 guys should be guys who are on the bubble of maybe getting drafted. I really think they're all guys who should be solidly well within the draft. And, for the same reasons you mentioned with Hamilton and McLaughlin, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if either of those guys goes in the 3rd round. I'm going with 5th round, but, Ty Hamilton, I mean, his brother went in the 3rd round. I think he's pretty similar to his brother in terms of who he is as a prospect, maybe even a little bit more athletic, maybe not quite as much production at Ohio State, but I think, Ty Hamilton could go anywhere 3rd to 5th round. I wouldn't be surprised. I went on the lower, more conservative end of that range with the 5th round. Same thing with Seth McLaughlin. I think, the one thing that works against him, as you mentioned, he is coming off that Achilles injury. He hasn't been able to work out for scouts during the pre-draft process. And so, any questions teams might have about his athleticism, how that'll translate to the NFL, he unfortunately has not been able to show that in pre-draft workout. So I think, he's a guy who probably should be a 3rd, 4th round pick. Maybe that pushed him down to the 5th round. I think to your point about his issues at Alabama, just don't draft him if you're the team that drafts Jalen Milroe, because, there was a chatter that, some of those snapping issues had to do with Caden's issues of Jalen Milroe. So if you draft Will Howard, I'd recommend going ahead and drafting Seth McLaughlin, because those two, they are very close friends, and you can tell they had a really good rapport with each other. But yeah, I'll say 5th round. And again, if Seth McLaughlin goes in the 3rd or 4th round, I won't be surprised, because I think he's more than deserving to go in those rounds. But I'm well, I can't put everybody in the first 4 rounds. So I went Ty Hamilton, Seth McLaughlin, Andy, Jordan Hancock, Cody Simon. Where do you have both of them going?
Yeah, no, it's and to your point, about optimism and how we're weighing things here. It's like I said, I'm scarred from last year, man, over picking so many people. But the counterpoint to it is they didn't win a national title last year, and we've seen it with other drafts in the past. Georgia coming off its national championship, Michigan, like teams that win a national title tend to get a boost to their draft players. So I don't think it's unreasonable to have a more optimistic projection like you're having. But that's the discourse of it, right? And you don't know it's hard to get in the mind of NFL GMs. We've seen so many draft surprises over the years, both from Ohio State and from other teams across college football. But getting into those two guys, I do have Jordan Hancock going in the 5th round. I, again, would draft him much higher if I were making picks. I think he's worth it. And there's a realistic shot that NFL executives see it the way I see it, and Jordan goes off. I could see him going as high as the 3rd round. Because I think teams, like, if they actually sit down and evaluate and look at what his value could be in an NFL secondary, they'll see he's a day 2 talent. But I have him going in the 5th because I do think there's some of that undervalue, some of that, seeing exactly how he fits, seeing, I have, it's just some of it is, again, just the instincts and the guts that I have of going with him in the 5th round and seeing some of that slippage just because of his position being undervalued in some ways, and where other Ohio State defensive backs have fallen last year. Maybe even it's residual, like being so sure Josh Proctor was going to get drafted last year and he didn't, and being bummed he's not in the league right now. But that's where I have Jordan Hancock. And then the 6th round for Cody Simon, I just haven't seen him climb up enough draft boards, and it's in the mock drafts and things. And it is a little weird to see because, like you said, Tommy was a 5th round pick last year. And I agree with you that he is more athletic prospect than Tommy was. But whether it's Ohio State fatigue, whether it's from teams, whether it's, not seeing the value that Cody brought to Ohio State and being that middle guy, not being the most, he's a good athlete, but he's not a freak athlete, seeing some of that, I think I have Cody Simon slipping to the 6th round. But like a lot of the guys I've talked about here, I think he's a steal there. And, for me, like, it almost, I do want to throw it out there that while he, he's certainly not getting mocked there, I do think there's a chance that Josh Fryer could come off the board in the 7th. That a team could look at the experience he's had. He's a guy that could slide into guard if you needed. Could be a right tackle at the next level. I don't think he's going to be a left tackle for a franchise, but he could be a depth piece that a team adds in the 7th round, and maybe gets Ohio State over to not just tie the record for draft picks, but break it. So maybe just a little hope I'll throw out there for that. But because part of it's that I really liked covering Josh too, and wrote a big feature on him this week that I liked. But that's kind of mine. I'm not going to project him as a 7th rounder, though. I do think he ultimately slips out of the draft, and we just end up in a sort of disappointing, but also really cool tie for the most draft picks ever from Ohio State. And that's where I have my projections.
Yeah, I'm going with a more pessimistic view on Josh Fryer and G. Scott Jr. as well. Like I said, I think both of them will land opportunities as free agents, and I wouldn't be shocked if either of them made a team. But I do think that most likely, those guys are not going to get drafted. Certainly, though, a lot of Ohio State fans going to be rooting for at least one of them to get drafted, because if that's the case, there's a very good chance Ohio State would have 16 NFL draft picks, and that would be the all-time record for a 7-round draft. And so it's going to be a lot of fun following this draft over the next 3 days. We will have lots of coverage to come on 11warriors.com as it all unfolds. Thursday, 1st round starts at 8 p.m. Friday, 2nd round starts at 7 p.m. Saturday, day 3, which begins at the 4th round, starts at noon. We will be covering all of it from start to finish over on 11warriors.com. So hope you will follow our coverage there all week. Hope you enjoy the draft. And we'll be back next week to look back at the draft. If Ohio State has any transfer portal movement as we're sitting here recording Tuesday afternoon, Ohio State Hadn't added anyone yet. Maybe that happens soon, but we will talk about that next week if it happens. We will talk about any transfer portal movement that might happen for the Buckeyes, look back on what happened in the NFL draft, and continue looking ahead to the 2025 season for the Ohio State football team. So thanks for joining us again for another episode of Real Pod Wednesdays. For Andy Anders, I'm Dan Hope. We'll catch you next week.